Hey, this is Paul, and this is the Podcast Report, episode 109, How to Turn Your Podcast into a Content Marketing Machine. This is the recording from last year's Social Media Marketing World. Always a great event, always a great time. Thrilled to be able to share it with you. If you head out to thepodcastreport.com/109, I've also got an option for you to grab these slides. The presentation will make a little bit more sense with them. Social Media Marketing World is the social media marketing event of the year. It's not necessarily the podcasting event of the year, but one of the reasons why I think this event is so important is that it brings it all together. You will have your podcasters next to your Facebookers, next to your Twitterers, next to your bloggers and your Snapchatters and all these types talking about the big picture, how it all comes together. And one of the things I applaud, one of the things I love in this show, as you know, is trying to figure out how all of this comes together. So I'm thrilled to offer this to you. It's a little bit longer than the average episode, but I don't think you will have a problem with that. Now, if you would like to join me for Social Media Marketing World 2017, I got two things for you. Number one, I'm doing a panel. I'm doing a killer panel. Gary Leland, making over $1 million through his podcast, selling softball bats, selling wallpaper, selling hats, selling the very non-nerdy things that you don't typically associate with podcasting. Gary is a genius. Gary is one of my favorite people in the world, and I can't wait to share the panel with him. But not just Gary. We've got John. There's only one John in podcasting. John Lee Dumas. We've got John, and as you know, he's $1 million plus man in the podcasting space, selling some of the more traditional stuff. Yeah, the topic is monetization. And then finally, last but not least, we've got Rob Walch from Libsyn, who's going to talk about ad insertion, what they've been doing at Libsyn, what they've seen, what's worked, what hasn't worked. Hopefully, if all goes well, Rob and I will have a very special case study to show you. But here's the deal. The panel will only be what's working right now, will only be what people are doing right now, and will be the entire face of the podcasting industry because, my friends, this is the Podcast Industry Report. If you'd like to come, if you head out to thepodcastreport.com/109, I've got a link to the event. If you pick it up, they pass a few bucks my way. And what I would love to do is I would love to buy you breakfast, and I'd love to see what we can get in terms of the other presenters to come to that as well. So thepodcastreport.com/109 for links about the event, for links to the slides, and pick that up, let me know, and we'll buy you breakfast at the event and chat podcasting. So I've rambled enough. This is the Podcast Report. Let's get to it.
A lot of you already met Paul. As you can see, he's very sociable. Paul's a down-to-earth guy. I like the fact how he just cuts to the chase. He's written a couple of books last year on YouTube, this year on how to podcast. He's going to show you how to take that content, or take your podcast, and do more with it to get that content out. Okay? So get ready to take some notes. I'm sure we're going to be entertained. We're going to get some actionable tips. So let's bring on Mr. Paul Colligan.
Thank you. Who, hands down, this is the best event you've been to in a long time? Raise your hand. Yeah. Don't worry, I'm not going to make it better. The reason I like this event is it's not just one story of one tech. This is social media. This is and media is the key word, with social being the descriptor. And the question is, how does all of this fit together? You know, and my goal has never been the microphone shootout or the hosting, whatever. My goal is, how does all this fit together? So when they asked me how to turn your podcast into a content marketing machine, I got giddy. I literally got giddy. So this is my day job. I am a 10-time Amazon bestseller, which is a game you can play, but it's a credibility thing, because one of the things I do is I produce content in other places. I'm an executive podcast producer. I do a lot of behind the scenes for a lot of high-level podcasts. I'll be chatting about a couple of them here. What I like to do, I think there's nothing sadder than a business school teacher who hasn't been in business for the last 30 years, you know? And, the guy who wrote the podcast book because he got the gig as a technical writer, it's just sad. Over a decade in podcasting. I'm old, that's what it is. My podcast is the Podcast Report. If you want to go social, paulcolligan.com/Facebook, paulcolligan.com/Twitter, paulcolligan.com/YouTube. That's your first tip. Don't ever be an evangelist for someone else's platform. It's not about, you can find me at Twitter here. It's paulcolligan.com/Twitter. You subscribe to my show at iTunes by thepodcastreport.com/iTunes. Market yourself. These are all these platforms for you to do that. How to Podcast 2016 is here at the show in the bookstore. After this run of podcast, it's me, it's John Lee Dumas next, and then it's the panel after that. After that, we're all going to go to the bookstore and center books. How to Podcast is there. The Podcast Report Volume 1, I put that up there as an example of what we can do. Those are transcripts from the first 25 episodes. Edited, nicely formatted, but a number one top-selling Amazon book. There's just transcripts from a show. One of the things you could do, because believe it or not, as much as we like podcasting, not everybody does. And some people like to just read the stuff. So today we're going to cover content that attracts and acquires a new audience. See, how many people have a podcast? Raise your hand. How many people have listeners? Raise your hand. Okay? That part's easy. It's the new listeners. It's the new audience. That's what we're going to chat about today. And content marketing is a fabulous way to do that. Your podcast a marketing machine as opposed to a veritable time suck. Podcast is, I'm hearing the voice of recognition in the front row. Once your podcast becomes a marketing machine, the game changes. You start to smile in the morning. You start to, seriously, there are people, I talked to someone, podcast is ruining my life. Let's make it a content machine. 2 podcast content marketing bonuses. We'll have some fun there. That's called the tease. 5 content marketing engagement models. The role of show notes. I put this in inside the LinkedIn group for this event. There were several of you who wanted to know about show notes. We'll chat about that, how that fits into the larger game. Principles that move people to action, and then next steps for you. All right. Content that gets a new audience. Raise your hand if you have a podcast. Keep your hand up if your content is fantastic. All right? Look at that. Fact of the matter is, your content is fantastic. Congratulations. Give it up for the fantastic content in this room. Okay? Here's the problem. There's only 2 types of people in this world. Okay? Those who know what a podcast is and those who don't. That's it. My mother to this day, God bless you, Mom. She believes she cannot listen to my stuff because I don't have an Apple. Mom, I will buy you an iPod. Oh, I like my Kindle. And one day I come home or I come to visit Mom and she's got iHeartRadio on her Kindle Fire. And I go, Mom, you have iHeartRadio. I didn't even know you knew how to install apps, but congratulations, Mom. Mom goes, well, the radio said I should put iHeartRadio on my Kindle. Great, Mom. I'm on iHeartRadio too. And Mom goes, you're on the radio? Like, finally, I'm justified as a human being, And I'm like, no, Mom, it's my podcast. But how could your podcast be on iHeartRadio? Fine, Mom, I'm on the radio. So, but the thing is, this is big. There are a lot of us so proud that we're a podcaster, but, and for those who know what a podcast is, great, but there are those who don't. You know what? Your content is good for people who don't know what a podcast is. And by the way, that's where your next audience is. And that's the principle of all this content marketing I want to chat about today. You see, we sadly forget about the people who don't know what a podcast is, and we don't do the math. Paul, how can I get more people to search my keywords in iTunes and click subscribe? That is the absolute worst strategy in the entire world. The absolute worst strategy in the entire world. Yet I get that question every day. John Lee Dumas is here, and you just can't talk. You're not allowed. I don't know if you know this. Legally, you're not allowed to talk about podcasting without mentioning John Lee Dumas. It's a rule. And John. I introduced John to Sean Collins, who's here at the event. Sean runs an event called Affiliate Marketing Summit. Sean gets 6,000 people at his Vegas event. He gets 5,000 people at his New York event. Okay, this guy is tremendous. He does huge. He's got 45,000 on his physical magazine. The guy's going crazy, and he's like, yeah, this John Dumas guy, I've heard of him. What's the deal? I'm like, get on his show. And introduce the two. And what's going to happen is Sean Collins is not going to go, I finally got on the Entrepreneur on Fire podcast. He's going to go, here's an interview with me. And there are going to be thousands and thousands of affiliate marketers who are interested that Sean was interviewed, not that Sean was on a podcast. So begin to think about that. How do we get our name outside the podcast space? So the solution is that we take our podcast content across all the platforms, even those who don't have audio and video. Some of you looked at that transcripts Kindle book and said, okay, that's kind of cool. Some of you said, yeah, I would never read transcripts. It's okay. I did that book of transcripts for those of you who said, that's kind of cool. Once we take our content, we move it across all the platforms to all the places that's kind of cool, we're good to go. I've had people who have found me by finding my book of transcripts. Yes, they paid money for transcripts for a show they can listen to for free. They've liked what they've seen. And they've gone further, and they've subscribed and bought my book and bought my course and gone from there. So this is what we want to do, and it's all LCSST, which we'll chat about in a second. So the 2 content marketing bonuses, okay? The podcast
is the absolute fastest content creation out there. Okay, who's good at math? Raise your hand. Okay, how long does it take you to record a 10-minute podcast? Go! 10 minutes, exactly. Why? Because math. Okay? That's why. And you can do that if you want hashtag because math. Now, the beautiful thing is a 10-minute podcast takes you 10 minutes to record, a 20-minute podcast takes you 20 minutes to record. A 250-word blog post will suck you the life out of your soul for 2 weeks as it goes through editorial and lawyer and that kind of stuff. Oh my goodness, make the pain end, dear God. So, when you think about podcasts as content creation, when you know your stuff, great. If you don't know your stuff, just interview somebody who does. Does that work? I talk to the guy who speaks after me. Okay? You good? You just get a funny tweet? You want to share that with all of us? Or, and, I'm just perplexed now. I don't know what's going on. The transcript, everybody asks, what do we do about transcripts? What do we do about transcripts? Transcripts are a content production asset. They are not necessarily content, they're a content production asset. There is some raw value. Some people like the transcripts. And I'll tell you, a lot of people don't know this, but yesterday Google turned on podcasts. We now have a podcast directory at Google. Is there a chance that Google could take their voice to text and start putting that in the index and our words in our podcast could be searchable at Google? Yes. Funny thing is I actually had to check the legalities on this. I am past an NDA 10 years ago. Google was talking about doing this. Okay? I don't know if they're doing it anymore. The team's gone, but I'm past my NDA, so I can tell you they were looking at it. Asset. Now, here's the thing. It has a starting point value. It's a great place to start. Hand the transcripts over to somebody who does an article. Okay? Hand the transcripts to somebody who takes them and cleans them up. One of the best chapters in my How to Podcast book is episode number whatever of the podcast report when I interviewed John. And but it was formatted, it was fixed, we put in the links, we did a couple things, we rearranged some things to make it work. It's a good starting point. The other thing, though, that's really good is it's a quick reference value. This gets forgotten. When you want to go through a podcast, you do an hour-and-a-half long interview. Where was that point that person said that one thing? That's what the transcript's for. One of my clients right now, he does about an hour-and-a-half interview. We dumb it down. We edit it down to about 20 minutes for the main show. And what we do is instead of going through audio and clipping all these things, we just edit the transcript. We just do strike through for the stuff to take out. Transcript's a fabulous starting point for a production asset. So raw value, starting point value, quick reference value, but by itself, just posting it to your website don't do. Okay, the progression. We will chat about LCSST in a second, but that is the progression for content from your podcast. Now, none of these are the same. This is the process, okay? And we forget this. There are different levels of engagement. Some of you are here because you know me, maybe even like me. There might even be one poor soul in here who trusts me. But most of you are in this room because you looked at the topic, and the topic was podcast as a content production process. So we're at the top. That's where we start. And in social, that's the like. That's the heart connect. The heart connect happens on their terms. A lot of you, I met a lot of you before we started this, and yeah, I'm going to start a podcast. Oh, cool. Podcasting is great. Smile goes back and forth. We did the connect. That's the first step. That happens on the heart level. That's the part of social that's really, really, really cool. John does this great Entrepreneur on Fire. You know, so many of us want to be an entrepreneur. We want to start. We want to go there. You know, Pat Flynn, zero, passive income. Who doesn't want that? The heart connects. You know, and so that's how we start the process. That's the like. This is why Instagram with the kids is so huge, because really what the like is, yeah, connect with that photo. You know, I was there at that party. I had that friend. You know, my daughter, as an internet marketer, this makes us want to scream. I'm like, hon, you're only following 30 people on Instagram and you have 30 likes on every one of your photos. She's 100% engagement. Because it's that like process. It's that step. It's her friends are connecting on their terms saying we like this stuff. So that's where it starts. Click. You're not going to click. You're not going to get a click until you get a like. Nobody clicks until they like the concept of what it is that they're clicking on. So if you don't have the like, you don't get the click. This is important. Click here. Websites are so fun these days. Be sure to bookmark this website and come back often. Yeah, right. Or my favorite one, join my mailing list so that I may spammeth you. You know, they're not going to click until they like what it is that they're clicking on. So it starts with the like, it goes to the click. The click is where curiosity kicks in. Oh, I want a little more. a little more. True story. Social Media Examiner. This is sobering, but it's true. Social Media Examiner, we put up an article. Basically, the title is, this is a really good video. The topic is, the content is, this is a video that you should watch, then the video. That's basically it. Got 3,000 shares on Twitter in the first couple of hours. Only 1,500 people viewed the video. 1,500 people didn't even watch the video, but they're sharing it around. This like thing, this share thing, it's low-level stuff. It's not engagement. It's not real. People liked Stelzner. People liked that he gave a cool video. They liked that he said you need to watch this video, and they want to share that with other people, but it's low-level stuff. Click, like, share. Brain starts to kick in. And sharing on the different levels gets a little bit higher. That one-click share button, that's really easy. But it's when the friend goes, I'm listening to this podcast, and it's pretty good. The share button on the website's good, but the tell your friends about this, that's even better. Once they're sharing, that's where the brain kicks in. This is really important. It's no more curiosity. It's no more likes. It's the brain. This is a good show. This is a good thing. And once somebody realizes this is a good thing, that's when we start buying the books. That's when we start going to the products. That's when we start going to their events. Think of Social Media Examiner. It started, hey, I'm social, Mike's social, let's connect. Oh, look at that. It's an article about Twitter. I use Twitter. I like Twitter, and it's engaged. But then there's an article that we can use at work. And I shared that article with my boss. Then a couple months later, Mike says there's an event down in San Diego. I tell my boss, remember that article I sent you? Yeah. They're all going to be in San Diego. I would like to give of myself to come to San Diego for an event to learn the type of things that Mike Cadiz talks about. This is the progression. Now, when they subscribe, this is good. That's when we know that the first date is possible. Okay? Remember the first date? First date's mellow. The first date is not committal. I was thinking we would have, dinner at a restaurant where people normally propose to each other. We're going to go on the night of a full moon, and I have a, table right by the moon. That's not the first date. That's not the first date. Maybe it was for John. I don't know. But the first date is coffee, 2:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. You're really, really careful. This is not committal. This is where it starts. And that's the beautiful thing about social. See, if you come to my website, you give me your email address, bam, I can stalk you now if I want to. But you can like my Twitter page, get off at any time. You can like my Facebook, get out at any time. And in this room, you can subscribe to a podcast. I don't have any information about you yet. It's the first date. Subscribe is the first date. And nothing happens until after the first date. And some people go way too fast on the first date. Sometimes it's successful, but most of the time it's really bad. The results are terrible. You can't believe this guy I met. That happens in podcasting. You listen to a show and all of a sudden before anything happens, they start selling you stuff or that type of thing. Subscribe's the first date. That's where and just the option of subscribes know the first date's possible. Then the transaction comes later. The transaction is where things start to be exchanged. And that might be, if you want to use the date analogy, kiss and or other things. But, on the internet, the transaction is maybe an email address. Maybe some biographical information. Maybe some stuff that I can use to market with, or of course, maybe at some point some cash. Of course, you start with a cheap book. Why is my How to Podcast book $2.99 all the time? Because it's cheap. Because I'm a cheap date. Write that down, everybody. Paul just said he's a tweet. I'm going to go back over here. Paul just said he's a cheap date. That's the new hashtag. But that's the process. And so what happens is a lot of us start with transact. This is the so-and-so podcast where I'm going to blow your mind, but I'm not going to do anything that blows your mind on the show because I want your email address, so give me your email address. We've all listened to those shows. We've all left those shows. They've all gone away. But when it starts with, this is a show about something I care about, I'm going to click on. Maybe I'll share something they said, maybe a quote. I'll subscribe. Then the transaction begins. This is the process. These are the 5 engagement models. Now, what this leads to is, actually, I just put this in the wrong place, but we'll just grab it right now. One of the questions you asked me in the LinkedIn group for this event is, what about show notes versus transcripts? The question is how much should I put in show notes? How much should I put into transcripts? How much effort should I put in the page, the download, all that good stuff? The reality is, first reality is, if there's nothing more, why take the next step? So I know people who do these 2.5-hour long podcasts. At the end of the 2.5 hours, they're done. If there's no more, why do you take the next step? So the first thing you got to do with your show notes and your transcripts and your podcast is what's next. If you don't know what's next, your audience has no idea what's next. So the first thing you got to do in the show notes and the transcripts is what is the next step? And then the other funny thing is do they even know you're interested? One of the big things I realized this weekend about podcasting, my biggest take home, is podcasting has no common language. Twitter, we talk a specific language. Facebook, we talk a specific language. YouTube, or YouTube, we definitely talk a specific language. Podcasting, everybody has something different from it. And what's funny, there are people who podcast, there are people who do 2.5-hour long interviews with people where people give their entire life story, and then they want to know why they get no opt-ins. Well, A, they gave their entire life story with 2.5 hours. Oh, and by the way, they never asked for the opt-in. They never said, for more, go here. So your show notes, your transcripts, those are to tell people where to go next on that progression, on that process. What happens past the like? What happens past the subscribe? What happens after the first date? So that's how it all works together. So, I got some ideas for you. I want to show you two heroes and one, not so hero, but Amy Porterfield. Who knows Amy Porterfield? To know Amy is to love Amy. She is just absolutely one of the best in the world. And the thing about Amy is, every episode she gives, many podcasters would say she gives too much, but Amy makes it very clear that there's more. Every episode, 3 or 4 times in the show notes, that big, big, big banner that says, click here to get whatever the giveaway is for every episode. So Amy is intriguing, Amy is giving, but Amy makes it very, very clear, this is the first date. This is the first date. This is the first day. And the cool thing is, when you listen to an episode, you go all the way through, I want that checklist. I want that checklist now. I would pay for that checklist, but the fact that she's giving it away just shows how awesome she is. And Amy does this every episode. And here's one of the cool things. Talk to Amy. Talk to her about her last launch. Talk to her about what percentage of people were tagged from the podcast. You want to talk ROI? Now we're good to go. See, we do these podcasts and then nothing else happens after the podcast. You don't ask for anything. Amy gives a little more for the transaction. That's the model. Amy will teach you how to internet market in ways that you used to have to pay for, but this is a great model for you to follow. The podcast report. See, here's the funny thing. I know this may come as a surprise to you, but I'm loud and boisterous, and some people find me a little bit overwhelming. It's kind of scary. Okay? Yes. And that's just my wife. This is an easy way to find out what Paul's up to. Just by the transcripts. I don't know what a podcast is yet. By the transcripts. And I don't have to give Paul my credit card. I give Amazon my credit card. Amazon's a great place to give your credit card to because they're safe. I did an A/B test once, and it hurt me for about 48 hours, then it opened up my eyes. Do you know what an A/B test is? Raise your hand. Okay, good. An A/B test. I did subject for A and B was, here's a cool video I want you to watch. Same exact subject. Content was, hey, this is Paul. I got a really cool video that I want you to watch with a link. A got paulcolligan.com/cool video. B got youtube.com / #GH41, whatever it is that YouTube does. Thank you, Paul. The only difference between the two was the link. Now, this is an audience who knows, likes, and trusts me, supposedly. Half of them got that link, half of them got YouTube. YouTube got 15% more clicks. 15% more clicks. Why? People who supposedly know, like, and trust me. YouTube's safe. YouTube is safe. YouTube's kiddie videos. YouTube's serene landscapes. Is that Yule log. Nothing bad happens on YouTube. Paul, that marketer, he's going to try to sell me something. YouTube's safe. Even though they know, they like, they trust me, YouTube's safe. I have sold, if I had put the podcast report, transcript season 1 up at my own website, I would sell less than if I sold them at Amazon. Why? Amazon's safe. On that first date, you go to the cafe where the person knows how much a cup of coffee costs. Why? Because Starbucks is safe. When the process starts, you want to go safe. So right now, iTunes is safe for some, but, a big gigantic play button is safe. Putting yourself at some of the websites, this is the reason why I promote SoundCloud for some. SoundCloud for some is safe. Where's your content going that's safe? Now, this is a model. This is a fantastic model. This is a fantastic model. And I can say that because I was the brains behind it. This is my favorite thing I've ever done. This podcast just launched recently. This is StoryBrand with Donald Miller. And what we've done with each episode is the episode is fully contained. Starts with Don and JJ chatting about the topic of today's episode. And then the interview where they talk about the topic of today's episode. And then a web critique that critiques an element of what they talked about in the topic of today's episode. And then at the end of the episode, they say, if you're interested in this topic, oh, and by the way, if they've listened to the whole show, they're interested in this topic. See, that's how that works. They go, if you'd like the entire interview, I would like the entire interview. I like what they said in the 20 minutes. What did they not say? That little curiosity thing. If you'd like the video version of the web critique, well, yeah, I did. He talked about all that stuff. I want to see it. Then give us your name and email address. Now, the interview is fantastic. We were reached out to by Apple at episode 3 to promote. We got on the front page of iTunes, new and notable, before episode 4 came out. They liked the thing so much. The episodes are gorgeous. They're self-contained. They're wonderful. But every one of them has an opt-in for what's next. The content's great. The transcripts are good. The rest of the interview is great. The video is good. Now, the beautiful thing is Don's very, very safe. Don has a 7-step process. How many steps? 7. Guess how many episodes per season? 7. Guess what episode 1's about? Step 1. Now, see, episode 3 is fantastic. If you really want to get a good example of the show, although the Michael Hyatt interview is fantastic. Dave Ramsey is the king of making his customer the hero. Guess what Don's step 3 is? I'll give you a clue. It's your customer's the hero, not you. So there's an interview with Dave Ramsey where they talk about making the customer the hero. Then you can get the unedited interview, and you can get the video, and you can get these things. And then when he does 7 episodes, he goes back to season 2 and he starts all over again. Once you've listened to 3 or 4 seasons, you know what step 3 of the process is. You know his process. You know his steps. He sells a home study version of his course. He sells his course. He sells the ability for one of his people to come out to your company to teach the course. Or if you like him and he likes you, you can hire him to come out and take your company through the process. It ain't cheap. Yes? Oh, every week we're just going to go. We're not going to miss. But it's just 7. These are the 7 steps. And the thing is, Don is about these 7 steps. And simplicity is wonderful. You know, when you go on a date, you want to know what that person is about. It says, this is step 3 of my 7-step process. This is step 4 of my 7-step process. Who can handle a 7-step process? Raise your hand. You know, it's about story. It's about story in business. It's about story in branding. And we've all heard, it's been pounded in our heads. You have to use story. You have to use story. You have to use story. Yeah, how? What if I don't have a good story? What if my story is boring? What do I do? He's got a 7-step process. You know, and can you figure out the entire process by listening to 7 episodes? Yes. But here's the thing. You know, you ever heard of the 7 steps of highly effective people? Could you figure out his 7 steps and not go by his store and spend $200-300 every year? Nope. Same model. You could buy his book. By the way, the book comes out in October. His show is called Building a Story Brand. What do you think his book's going to be called? Give you a clue. Building a Story Brand. And so when people go to iTunes for iBooks to see Don's book, Building a Story Brand, what are they going to see? About 4 or 5 seasons of the podcast. They might not buy the book. They might just listen to the podcast. Beautiful. After 3 or 4 episodes of the podcast, they're going to buy the book. And now instead of just buying the book and putting it on your hard drive, they're actually going to read it because they've been going through the podcast. Is it a podcast? Is it a book? Is it a video series? What is it? It's all of them. You start to build your podcast out that way, and you're going to be at a really, really good place. You know, is Amy doing a podcast? Or is Amy doing online training that's delivered by podcast? It's all of that. And even in my transcripts, am I doing a podcast or am I just, mouthing my way through Kindle content? See, it gets bigger and bigger, and you got to get more analytical, and you got to think the whole picture. And that's what we've got here. You need a machine. And the machine is this. It's multimedia from your podcast content. Audio, video, podcast, I don't care. It's multimedia. Multimedia is multiple medias from your podcast content. Okay? Audio with slides, video without slides. We do this with Don. It's beautiful because, think about it, people. The favorite part of the podcast for most people is his audio version of a web critique. Okay? We have audio of video that they opt in to get the rest for. So we do articles, we do books, we do digital books, we do quote cards, we do all these things, and we'll go through a big master list. Then you attract your audience on all platforms to your content. I've met people, and I just kind of weep for them. Well, if they don't want to listen on a podcast, I don't want to share. No. Whose content is bigger than a podcast? I'll give you a clue. It's all of you. If you don't think your podcast is bigger than if your content is bigger than the podcast, get out of podcasting. Figure out your content first. Okay? So you start delivering all platforms, audio, video, print, virtual, put it on buttons, put it on sticks, t-shirts, multimedia, catch them from all sides. Create opportunities for all levels of engagement. You ever looked at a 2.5 hour long podcast and go, I don't know if I'm ready yet? Yep. Yeah. Is there a 10-minute version? Is there a 1-minute version? Instagram just turned on 1-minute videos. It'd be possible for when you're done with your podcast to just record a 1-minute video on Instagram and go, hey, people, I just talked about this, 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 and this. You can find it out here. Nice, simple, easy. Heart-centered connection is the first goal. Heart-centered connection is the first goal. I teach productivity. Subscribe now. Nope. Doesn't do anything. Not enough time in the day, tired, wish you actually remembered your kids' names. I got a podcast about that. That changes the whole thing. Identify with their need for content on their terms. I watch the majority of YouTube video on a treadmill, on a TV set. And I always love it because I'm walking on the treadmill. Yes, I do a treadmill. And walk on the treadmill, and they always go, leave a comment below. And that person's talking to the floor. Leave a comment below. What? Disconnect. Here's the beautiful thing. Connect with your audience. All you have to do is say, hey, if you're at YouTube proper, there's comments below. If you're watching on TV or phone, and by the way, more people are watching on TV or phone than are watching at youtube.com. Connect with your audience. Every time Don talks about his web critique, he says, yeah, I get it. It's an audio version of a web critique, kind of silly. Here's how you get the video version. Just speak to your audience. Let them know there's different versions. When you do that 1-minute Instagram video, just tell them, oh yeah, by the way, it's an audio version. Just speak to the platform that they're on. Recognize where they're at. If you're on the date and the date is shaking because it's so cold, I recognize you're cold. Maybe we should go into where the heater is. Not that cold ever happens in San Diego, apparently. Never create anything on a single platform. It's ridiculous. Never create anything on a single platform. If your podcast doesn't make a good transcript, don't do it. If you got video that doesn't make good audio, don't do it. If you don't have little quote cards that can come from what you've done, you have just wasted everybody's time. And then engage transactions with the respect they deserve. This one's tremendous. They've given you the email. That's trust. Thank you. You've given me your email. Let's take the next step. So the engagement process, start with the heart. Connect there. Give them something to do next. How will they know if you don't tell them what to do next? Paul, nobody ever signs up for my mailing list. Well, you don't mention your mailing list. That could be it. Make the next date possible. This is huge. Make the next date possible. Let them know what the next date is. Let them know where you can meet next. Let them know what happens next. The key, social media isn't about the transaction. So I took this slide. I tried to do a HeartTunes thing. iTunes changed the game for podcasters. They changed it pretty hard. They moved our whole process, as you know, from a little form inside of iTunes to having to get an iTunes Connect, the whole thing. I just did a quick idea from guess which episode it was, 80, of the podcast report where I talked about it. And I said, iTunes has changed the game again. That connected with the heart. All the podcast, again. I got a lot of likes, and then a lot of people came over to find out how they changed the game again. I let them know what was next. I let them know what the transaction was, but I wasn't expecting everybody to come and listen to that podcast to find that out. I showed that on Instagram. The transaction, here's an interesting one. So my book, my paperback book, sells for $14.95 everywhere. I sell it on Twitter for $9.99. You can buy now buttons in Twitter. Who's using buy now buttons in Twitter? Okay, you want to know why? They don't work. I've sold hundreds of copies of the 2016 version in the first couple of weeks through Amazon, print for $15, 3 or 4 times a day. This Twitter account's going out to people who know, like, and trust me. And they're seeing that it's $9.99 from me autographed, and they're going over to Amazon to pay $14.95. Why? Because Twitter's not a platform for sales. I've yet to sell a copy of the book through Twitter, and this tweet has gone out hundreds and hundreds of times. Why? Because social media isn't about engagement. Podcast content marketing machine. See, you move from just the marketing podcast in your content to podcast content in all of your marketing. See, a lot of people, they have 8 to 9 is Twitter time, 9 to 10 is Facebook time, 10 to 11 Snapchat time, 11 to 12 is, I don't know, Plurk time, I guess, whatever the next social network is. And what happens is we have a marketing podcast as part of our content, to podcast content in all of your marketing. You know, people come to me all the time, Paul, what should I do Twitter about? Well, if you have a podcast, that's a great place to start. It's true, nobody's interested in what you had for lunch. Okay, but if you got a new podcast out, you can do that. You can say iTunes is changing the game again, and you can do that content. So you move from just marketing podcast in your content to podcast content in all of the marketing, times the content models that make sense for you. That's the game. See, when a single podcast becomes more than a dozen marketing machines, you stop looking at the clock. See, the old model was we did a podcast, then we did everything else. That was the old model. The new model is we do the podcast, and then we do articles and cheat sheets from the podcast. Some of them are printed, some of them are digital, some of them are in Amazon, some of them in iBooks. We're all over the place. And then, by the way, we do preview videos about the podcast. We do it on Instagram, we do it on Snapchat, we do it on Twitter, we do it on all these places. Then we do social quote cards of the big ideas from the podcast. A lot of podcasters, iTunes changing it again? I haven't listened to your show in a little while, Paul, but I got to go do that. And then we take ebooks that are Kindles of transcripts, Kindles of lead magnets, big ideas that have come from it, that type of thing. Absolutely fantastic. And then finally, we have reasons to post on other networks. See, the old model of I got to get a podcast out the door, and the new model of all these other things, the new model is much, much, much better. And that's where we're going to go, and that's where we want to be. So, I'm over at Don Miller's house. We're putting together the whole thing. We're dreaming up the podcast. And I'm staying at his place. Anybody know this was a book? The 10 Make That 9 Habits of Very Organized People Make That 10, the tweets of Steve Martin. This is a physical book. Steve Martin's hilarious. Do you have to know what Twitter is to find this book funny? No. See, that's the beautiful thing. Steve made content on Twitter that transcended the platform and went to other places. Does your podcast make sense outside of a podcast? Some do, some don't. This is where we need to be. Our content on other places. The amount of people who've told me, Paul, my favorite part of your book is your interview with John Lee Dumas. Well, thank you, I guess. But here's the funny thing. That interview of my book that sells a lot of copies, and by the way, here's a little trick. When you interview somebody, you put them in the book, use their name as one of the authors, and then when people search for that person's name in Amazon, your book pops up, okay? It's a cool little trick. Don't tell John I did that, okay? And the funny thing is, so many people have come to me and said, yeah, I love that interview you did with John. It was great. It taught me a lot of stuff. It was really, really cool. I'm like, yeah, did you listen to the episode? Oh, that was an episode? Even podcasters are reading the transcript of my interview in a print book that they bought at Social Media Marketing World, not even realizing that it came from a podcast, even though it's the world's most famous and, I dare say, good-looking podcaster. And not the interviewer, John. Okay? So does your content transcend the platform? See, then we can start to do this. Twitter, we can make content and graphics. Facebook, we can make content, graphics, and video. YouTube, we can make video. We can do ebooks on Kindle and iBooks and Scribd and everybody else. Instagram, we can do graphics and video. Pinterest, we can do video, quote cards, text. LinkedIn, we can do video and quote cards. Google Plus, we can do video, quote cards. Snapchat, SoundCloud. The right content on the wrong social network is like the right Republican at the wrong Democratic convention. 2 steps. Create podcasts that make machines. Stop making podcasts that stand by themselves. Once the quote cards can come from them, once the cheat sheets can be downloaded, once the transcripts have value, once you have all these different things, now you got a machine going. And then what you do is you make machines from those podcasts. I'm done with the interview, it's over. No, it's not. It's only just begun. That was the content creation point. So create podcasts to make machines, then make machines from those podcasts. And it is a two-step process. I've had people, Paul, I recorded 100 episodes of my show. I have such amazing content. What are you doing with it? Well, I'm kind of busy making the show. Two-step process. Create podcasts to make machines from those podcasts. Okay, if you want more, I have got 5 minutes left. Here's the deal. I got a machine one sheet, that big list with some other stuff. I've got a one sheet that I can send you. It's called a lead magnet, an ethical bribe, whatever it is you want to call it. I've got the engagement model progression one sheet. I've got the machine examples audio recording. We're going to spend about an hour talking about all the different machines, how to do them. Get that audio to you. If you go to paulcolligan.com/machine, you can opt in for that and you can sign up for that. And that is what we call in the industry my last slide. See, here's the thing. Podcasters, it's fun. It's a lot of fun. But we tend to forget about the entire process. We tend to make our podcast and walk away and go, and that's where we get into trouble. True story, I had a guy call me. Paul, I have the top most downloaded teaching you how to speak Spanish podcast. Wow, good job. Killing it. People love me. I got all the reviews. Everybody loves me. Good job. Not making any money. Bad job. Why aren't you making any money? Why can't I get any sponsors? Well, who do you want for sponsors? Well, I want Berlitz. So you're telling me the people that charge to teach you how to speak Spanish, you want them to pay you on a show that gives that away for free? Yeah, it's podcasting. You get sponsors. Yeah, not that one. You know? You got to think through the process. You got to think what it is that you're doing. You got to build out the entire plan. So you ever thought about doing your own Spanish class? Well, I gave away the whole thing in my podcast. It's a bad move. You know? Hey, Paul, I bought my high-definition video studio. This is in the day before you could get a high-definition video studio for $600 and get a free iPhone with it. What do I do my podcast on? You know, if you take the opportunity, if you take the time, if you take the process to really plan out all the different areas that you're going to hit, your podcast can be the source of everything else. And when your podcast is the source of everything else, it gets easier, it gets more fun, you start thinking bigger, your audience gets bigger. And like my mom, they might not even realize they're consuming a podcast, but they're consuming you, and that's the important stuff because your content is fantastic. It's bigger than a podcast. Thank you so much. If you liked what I had to say, my name is Paul Colligan, socialmediaexaminer.com/reviews. Feedback. If you hated what I had to say, my name is John Lee Dumas, socialmediaexaminer.com/reviews. Feedback.
I think we can take two very quick questions, but a reminder, the next 2 hours are more great podcasting content. John's coming up next. We got Pat Flynn on a panel with Lauren Gaggio, Lou Mangello, and Chris Ducker. So if you're into podcasting, you probably don't want to move. So now we have time for 1.5 quick questions.
1.5 questions.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I'll try and keep it really brief on the question part. Before you do your podcast, you have some sort of planning process, notes that you go by, or no?
Yeah.
What's that process?
What do I want to accomplish? What do I want to accomplish from this show? You know, the podcast report, I'm going to sell copies of my book, and I want to sell high-level executive podcast production. Those are the two things that I want to sell.
You end up with a list of stuff you're going to talk about?
Yeah. I usually mind map the entire process. But what do I want to accomplish? I want to do that. What do I want to do? I want to keep podcasters in the know. What do podcasters need to know about? What do they need to know about that particular topic? So this morning was about Google entering into the podcast play. So what do podcasters need to know about Google entering into the play? And that's the process. I usually do mind maps, and those work best for me. Half question in the back? Yes?
When you make the content cards and the quotes and all that, is there any data or just, I have my personal opinion on it, but over branding them where it's like the same exact quote template card and you stick the
It's a
quote
great
in.
question.
It bothers me a lot, but a lot of my clients do
Yeah.
it and it looks good, but
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Yeah. See, the thing is, what's the most important thing of the quote card is my question. Is the most important thing about the quote card is that Paul said that iTunes changed it again? Or is it that iTunes changed it again? See, and exactly, it's the fact that iTunes changed it again. I don't like the common format because then they know that it's marketing. You know, my dream is that somebody sees the quote card and puts it at Pinterest who doesn't even care about my podcast. But then someone who looks at that person's Pinterest board and goes, what is the podcast report? Yeah, it's absolutely overproduced. Yeah, no, I'd like mine to look like I did them on WordSwag, or like my assistant did them on WordSwag, which is funny because that's exactly how we did them. Now, there are some people in this room who are doing really well with, you know, templated ones that are there, and sometimes there's a branding issue, there's some things that you want to take a look at, but Twitter is informal, Instagram is informal, and speak to that group informally. You know, if you showed up to that date, you know, for coffee in a tux, it would just kind of mess things up. So be careful. I like the informal. Some people argue with me on that one. The goal is not to win awards. I've never done a quote card to win an award for quote cards. Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. All right, it'll be John Lee's next, and then it's the big panel, which is going to be fantastic. So thank you so much.